Yesterday, I took part in a community conversation about conversion therapy hosted by Changeline here in Colorado Springs. Today, I want to share some of what we talked about. There were parents there were people who had survived conversion therapy, there were therapists, ministers, all kinds of educators. There were just lots of us from different angles having this conversation as a first conversation here in Colorado Springs. But before I talk about all this, I just want to say again, this content can be challenging, and it's sensitive, and if you need to take care of yourself by leaving the room, it will not hurt my feelings. Or take care of yourself in whatever way you need to take care of yourself. Maybe you need to move closer to the person who's sitting next to you and hold their hand or something. So I want to take a quick poll. Who even knows what conversion therapy is or what it does? I want to know how much education I have to do. Okay, that's pretty good. Who knows about the Colorado law banning conversion therapy in our state? Woohoo, we're one of 23 states. And who knows about the recent lawsuit that went to the National Supreme Court from a therapist here in Colorado Springs who was suing to be able to talk about conversion therapy with her clients? There you go. And most importantly, I want to talk about why we need to talk about this in church. But first, let's get some vocabulary. Conversion therapy is the effort to change sexual orientation, romantic orientation, gender identity, or gender expression to align with cisgender and heterosexual norms. Who knows what cisgender means? I love an educated congregation. Good. Cisgender means you align with the gender you were born with. So as a woman, I align with being in a woman's body. So where does change therapy happen? It most often happens in what has come to be called high control Christian contexts, which some of us might call fundamentalist. But I think it's fundamentalist times 10, really. There are also licensed mental health practitioners that practice this, and therapists in these religious groups are working together now to sort of give themselves credibility. Conversion ideology holds that a queer individual is somehow incomplete, broken, sick, ill, or degenerate, and queerness is the result of one or more reasons, such as a damaged relationship with one's parents, siblings, authorities, or a negative experience with the opposite sex, pornography, a demonic spiritual influence, or a predatory queer adult experience. The practices of conversion therapy, I'm not even going to list all of that because there may be people in this room who've lived through those practices and they don't need me to talk about it, but it includes sexual and physical abuse in order to change someone. The consequences of conversion therapy, as you can imagine, are heavy psychological shame, guilt, low self-esteem, anger. Suicidal ideation for folks who've gone through change therapy often lasts a lifetime. Substance abuse, homelessness, often prostitution. Spiritual consequences, huge spiritual dissonance happens for lots of queer people where you feel like you can't be spiritual and be queer at the same time. You have to choose one or the other. So it leads to reduced connections with religious community. If people come out, then they leave their religious community. And so that's why we have to talk about it in church, because we need religious communities where people can be both queer and religious or spiritual. And we are one of those communities. So thank you. The history goes way back to colonial times, believe it or not. especially during that time when two-spirit indigenous were made to align with either male or female. And then it actually began in medical and psychiatric practices first. But then in 1973, homosexuality was declassified from the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that therapists use for categorizing mental disorders. So it was declassified, but ironically, that same year, the first modern Christian group, conversion therapy Christian group called Love in Action, rose up. And then Exit soon to follow, which became Exodus, that lasted another 30 years, who in 2009 disbanded their organization because they realized it didn't change them, and they realized all the damage they had done to folks. And if you want to see movies interviewing those folks about that whole experience, it's called Pray Away. It's a great movie. It's painful to watch, but it's really good education. By 2019, it was estimated that 700,000 people had experienced conversion therapy. That was almost 10 years ago. How many more 100,000? That's shocking. Yet conversion therapy continues on into this next generation. The biggest movement right now happening is a group called The Changed. And they're the most loud and public-facing ex-gay movement in the present. So the legal, 23 states have conversion therapy bans that have been written into law, and in Colorado you cannot practice conversion therapy on someone under the age of 18 or it's categorized as child abuse. Yay, Colorado. Yet this only applies to licensed professionals, with the vast majority of this still happening in Christian context, and still does not protect adults. However, there is a law sitting on the governor's desk right now waiting for his signature that reduces statute of limitations for adult, that actually gets rid of the statute of limitations for adults to go back and sue if they'd like to. Yay, Colorado. And this is where separation of church and state backfires, though. Every time we've tried to limit these kinds of religious practices in court, it has failed. Religious groups are basically exempt from the law. Another thing Colorado has done is reduce the age for confidential therapy to 12, which is really young, but that means 12-year-olds can go find a therapist and their parent doesn't have to know about it. Yay, Colorado. And this is where our Colorado ruling came in. Some people think that the Supreme Court actually sided with conversion therapy, but that is not true. That's not what they did. It gets very complicated, so I'm just going to keep it really simple. But basically, the Supreme Court said that our conversion therapy ban was not value neutral, that we were telling therapists what they had to do. And it was ruled a free speech issue. So guess what Colorado did? The very next day, they changed the language from therapists can't make someone ex-gay to therapists cannot have a predetermined conclusion about someone's identity. Pretty good. We don't even have to give in to the Supreme Court, do we? Yay, Colorado. But what all this has done, again, of course, has shone a light on conversion therapy again and brought it back into the conversation. I'm not sure it ever left the conversation. Conversion therapies have happened primarily through the weaponization of faith. It is through the church that the primary denigration of the LGBTQIA2+ community has happened. This is why we need to talk about it in church. I remember leaving for seminary with two burning desires. I really wanted to deeply understand the nature of oppression. Like, what is that mechanism and how does it work? And I wanted to understand how to create religious communities that were healing and not damaging to folks. You see, as a member of the queer community living in this Colorado Springs milieu 30 years ago, of religious conservatism, as well as the Catholic fundamentalism in my family, it was my personal experience that the church was abusing us. And therefore, it seemed to me that the church would need to ultimately be the place of healing and reconciliation for us. So this last week, I was invited to speak at the Senior Summit at Silver Key, that Silver Key puts on every year, and they wanted me to talk about aging as a queer person. And the stats actually are dismal. They don't go away as we age, they actually get worse, and that's a whole nother sermon. But then they asked me a pointed question. When you look at your life so far, what are you most proud of, and why does that moment stand out? And I told them that possibly the defining experience of my life was the moment I stepped out of self-betrayal and stepped away from the core beliefs that stripped me of my humanity. The trauma that homophobia and heterosexism had inflicted on my life was considerable. Loathsome sinner, said my mother, who proceeded to trade her relationship with me for her relationship with God. Condemnation had now separated me from all the important pillars in my life: my intimate partnership, my original family, my Catholic religion, which constituted my community, my budding vocation. I was going to be a music minister in the Catholic Church, and ultimately my relationship with the source of life. And my recovery began with learning how to recognize that cultural conditioning. In my early 30s, I read Sister Jeannie Gramick's she was a contemporary Catholic nun dissenting on issues of homophobia 30 years ago. She helped me to reframe sin not as my inherent depravity and disobedience, but as the tragic separation from my deepest sense of self, as a result of trying to live in a world that didn't understand me, make space for me, or treated me like a stranger. And at 33 years old, that's kind of an epiphany, right? It's not me that's wrong, it's actually the culture around me that's wrong. Those cultural messages of religious coercion. As another queer person put it, I lost my soul not from doing something wrong, but trying to do it right. Goodness, sorry. My asthma's been acting up, so you'll have to have patience with me. It was that moment, that defining moment, when I vowed to become a religious voice that was affirming to LGBTQIA2+ people. And I would spend my life shifting the locus of shame from queer people onto the extreme religiosity where it belonged. That's what's shameful. We are talking about this today in church because we need to participate in the disarmament of faith. What a moment for my voice to stop working, right? The mind body is a real thing, isn't it? So the day after the SCOTUS ruling, the APA said this: American Psychological Association is unsettled that the Supreme Court would treat restrictions against ineffective and harmful treatments as a violation of a counselor's speech rather than a regulation of professional conduct. Our ethical standards are unchanged. Psychologists should continue to provide evidence-based care and avoid practices known to cause harm. That therapist is still held accountable by her professional organization. But what really can be done to protect young people in spiritual and religious settings when we are largely unregulated? I will say that in our association, our own congregations are monitored and can be placed in special care by the UUA if they are having trouble. Our ministers, we have a detailed code of ethics to follow, and we are monitored by our professional association as well. Other mainline denominations have similar ethical codes and scrutinize their churches and clergy. But here we are, still without laws that name conversion therapy as abuse to adults. And many states that will not name it as abuse to minors either. And here's the really painful part. A handful of states in the South have what they call anti-shield laws now. In other words, those states cannot create laws that shield people from conversion therapy. Florida and its compatriots down there, and then maybe it was one of the Carolinas. It's well documented that conversion therapy survivors often have the same psychological responses that sexual abuse survivors have. And that's because I think conversion therapy is a form of abusing someone's sex and sexuality, which is core to our human identity. We could wonder a long time about what is attractive about these programs to folks. And I honestly believe that one strong pull to conversion therapy groups is that people get to be in community with other people who are struggling to be queer and Christian just like them, right? It's a community. It's a place to find somebody to talk to about this. Somewhere along the line, though, that honest need to just come together got really sick and twisted. As one survivor said, when it's all said and done, the damage done outweighs the moral obligation to please other people in the name of God. And ultimately, I think it will take all religious professionals and denominations to stand in the face of this high-control Christian context that is using God to validate just about anything these days. Holy war, anybody? The Catholic Church has recently taken a stand against conversion therapies. Go Pope Leo. So what will we do as a faith community to stand up and fight this kind of cultural abuse? What will we do as a larger society to stand against this deep-seated fear that generates so much damage? There is a need for religious groups to speak out against these unregulated church groups. I was asked at this conference if we could gather religious professionals together to speak against this and support these laws. They really need the religious voice. So if you hear a call today to get involved in this issue in the future, I hope you will say yes. And something else you can do is be a trusted adult. And if you want to know what a trusted adult looks like, just ask yourself, who did you trust as a youth and why? What about them made them trusted? What qualities did they have? What did they show that you could trust them? What did they show you? And to all the queers in this room, and I see you, you're my siblings, love you so much, so glad you're here. Understand that the weaponization of faith is not the faith practiced everywhere. Get to know the theology and the ideology behind your church's philosophy. Are they open, affirming? Do they invite all people to participate? And the last thing I'm going to say is religious community is well known in psychological circles as a protective factor for mental health. So if you separate a queer person from their religious community, you're taking away one of those pieces for their mental health. That's why we're talking about it in church. We are a place for people to come and have their mental health. So in the end, please know you can be queer right here and religious at the same time. Right here. Right here. Amen. A women, a people.